London glittered that winter as though determined to blind itself to every sorrow concealed beneath its polished surface. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, orchestras breathed life into waltzes, and silk skirts whispered secrets through gilded ballrooms. The season's grandest gathering unfolded within the residence of the Marchioness of Haverley, where every noble family of consequence had arrived eager to be admired, envied, or discussed. In such places, reputations were built upon glances and ruined by murmurs. Beauty was a currency more powerful than gold, and no woman understood its absence more keenly than Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. She stood near a towering column of white marble, partially hidden behind arrangements of winter roses. Her gown was elegant, her posture graceful, and her manners beyond reproach. Yet none of those qualities attracted notice. Society had long since judged her lacking in the one attribute it valued most. Her features were considered plain beside the dazzling faces that commanded every room. Men passed her without a second glance. Women offered polite smiles sharpened by concealed pity. Eleanor had learned to endure such treatment with quiet dignity. She smiled when expected. She danced when invited. She never betrayed the sting of exclusion. Yet beneath that composure lived a heart weary from years of comparison. She had grown accustomed to hearing herself described as sensible, agreeable, and kind. Never beautiful. Never desirable. Across the ballroom, young ladies gathered around one man whose presence seemed capable of bending the entire evening toward him. Duke Sebastian Blackthorne stood among admirers with effortless confidence. Tall, dark-haired, and impossibly distinguished, he carried himself with the assurance of someone born to command attention. Mothers dreamed of securing his proposal. Daughters dreamed of receiving it. The Duke rarely encouraged either fantasy. His reputation was curious. Though admired, he remained distant. Though surrounded, he appeared alone. Rumors suggested past betrayals had hardened him against affection. Others claimed he simply viewed marriage as a practical arrangement rather than a romantic union. Whatever the truth, London had watched him reject countless eligible women. That was why the announcement struck society with the force of a thunderclap. The orchestra had barely completed a waltz when conversation abruptly faltered. Heads turned. Fans froze midway through graceful movements. The Duke was crossing the ballroom. Not toward one of the celebrated beauties. Toward Eleanor. She felt the room's attention before she understood its cause. Her pulse stumbled as Sebastian stopped before her. "Lady Eleanor," he said with formal courtesy, "would you honor me with this dance?" The silence surrounding them became almost painful. Eleanor could scarcely believe her ears. "I would be honored, Your Grace." The dance floor opened before them. Hundreds of eyes followed their progress beneath shimmering chandeliers. Whispers multiplied like sparks racing through dry grass. As they moved through the waltz, Sebastian remained courteous yet reserved. He offered no flirtation, no obvious warmth. Still, for the first time in years, Eleanor felt visible. Not admired perhaps, but acknowledged. When the music ended, he surprised her again. "May I call upon your father tomorrow?" Her breath caught. The meaning required no explanation. Shock spread through the ballroom before the question had fully settled. Within 48 hours the engagement was announced. London exploded with speculation. Some claimed the Duke had discovered hidden virtues beneath Eleanor's modest appearance. Others insisted a secret romance must have existed for years. Newspapers celebrated the match. Society congratulated her family. Invitations flooded their home. Yet Eleanor herself remained uncertain. Their courtship was astonishingly brief. Sebastian treated her with impeccable respect, but she sensed a distance behind every conversation. He was never cruel, never unkind. Yet something remained carefully locked away. One rainy afternoon, several weeks before the wedding, Eleanor arrived unexpectedly at Blackthorne House for a scheduled meeting regarding estate matters. A servant informed her that the Duke was occupied in the library and asked whether she wished to wait. As she approached the partially open door, familiar laughter drifted into the corridor. A gentleman's voice spoke first. "You astonish me, Blackthorne. Half the kingdom sought your hand, yet you selected the one woman no man pursued." Another voice answered. "Sebastian's. Come. Unhurried. Cool. That is precisely why I selected her." A knot formed in Eleanor's stomach. His companion chuckled. "Surely there is more romance involved than that." "There is not." The words landed like stones. Silence followed briefly before Sebastian continued. "I have witnessed what vanity accomplishes. Beautiful women inspire competition, jealousy, and deception. Lady Eleanor possesses none of those dangers." The friend laughed again. And you find that appealing? I married her because she was ugly enough never to inspire vanity and quiet enough never to betray me. The world seemed to stop. The corridor blurred. Every sound inside the library faded beneath the sudden roar of her own heartbeat. For a moment she could neither move nor breathe. Years of whispered judgments returned with brutal clarity. Every pitying glance. Every cruel comparison. Every carefully disguised insult. She had survived them all because they came from strangers. This wound came from the man she was preparing to marry. Eleanor stepped backward before anyone noticed her presence. Her hands trembled, but she refused tears. She would not collapse in a corridor. She would not grant humiliation that victory. Days later, beneath the vaulted ceiling of a crowded cathedral, she walked toward Sebastian as London's elite watched from polished pews. The gossip had already spread. She could feel it in every stare. She could hear it hiding beneath every blessing. Yet her head remained high, her expression serene, her dignity untouched. She became Duchess Blackthorne before noon. That evening, after the final guests departed, Sebastian presented an emerald necklace glowing like captured firelight. Eleanor accepted it, lifted her gaze to his and asked softly, "Your Grace, was honesty meant as kindness or cruelty?" For the first time since they had met, the Duke had no answer. The question lingered between them long after the candles burned low. "Your Grace, was honesty meant as kindness or cruelty?" Sebastian Blackthorne had faced political rivals, ruthless businessmen, and ambitious noblemen without hesitation. Yet his young wife's quiet inquiry unsettled him more profoundly than any confrontation he could remember. He offered no answer that evening. None arrived the following morning either. Life at Blackthorne Manor settled into an outward rhythm of elegance and routine. Servants moved through vast corridors carrying silver trays. Fires crackled within marble hearths. Carriages arrived bearing guests and correspondents. To any observer, the Duke and Duchess appeared the perfect aristocratic couple. Only they understood the distance hidden beneath appearances. Eleanor fulfilled every duty expected of a duchess. She attended functions, hosted dinners, and managed household affairs with flawless composure. Yet a subtle change had emerged. She no longer searched her husband's face for approval. She no longer lingered during conversations. Every courtesy she extended was precise and measured. The wound remained invisible. And because it remained invisible, Sebastian found himself noticing it everywhere. He would glance toward her during breakfast and discover her gazing through rain-streaked windows rather than speaking. He would escort her through crowded gatherings and realize she never once sought his arm unless etiquette demanded it. The quiet warmth she had once offered had vanished. Months passed. Spring softened the countryside surrounding Blackthorne Manor. Wildflowers appeared along stone walls. Meadows brightened beneath sunlight. Villages awakened from winter's grip. It was then that Eleanor quietly began changing lives. She visited tenant cottages without announcing her intentions. She listened to widows struggling through difficult seasons. She sat beside ill children and learned their names. She inspected crumbling schoolrooms and leaking roofs. Rather than spending lavishly upon jewels or gowns, she redirected much of her personal allowance toward practical improvements. New blankets arrived before lingering cold could claim vulnerable lives. A village school received books. Several cottages received repairs. No speeches accompanied these acts. No newspapers celebrated them. Eleanor simply acted because suffering offended her conscience. News nevertheless traveled. The estate steward mentioned rising gratitude among tenants. Housekeepers spoke admiringly of her kindness. Letters arrived expressing appreciation. Sebastian listened with growing curiosity. One afternoon he rode through a village and witnessed something unexpected. Children were gathered outside a newly repaired schoolhouse. Eleanor stood among them beneath flowering trees, sunlight touching her chestnut hair. She was laughing at something a little girl had said. The sound startled him. He realized he had never heard his wife laugh within Blackthorne Manor. The children surrounded her as though she were a beloved aunt rather than a duchess. Nobody appeared concerned with beauty. Nobody measured her worth against impossible standards. They simply adored her. For reasons he could not explain, the sight lingered in his thoughts long afterward. Several weeks later, while traveling through London on business, Sebastian entered an exclusive florist known for importing rare blooms from across Europe. Without entirely understanding why, he purchased an extraordinary collection of French roses. Their petals carried shades of ivory and blush so delicate they resembled painted silk. The arrangement arrived at Blackthorne Manor the following morning. Eleanor thanked him politely. "They are beautiful, Your Grace." Nothing more. No blush. No delighted smile. No sign that the gesture carried special meaning. The flowers occupied a crystal vase in her sitting room, admired yet emotionally distant. The response bothered him far more than it should have. Summer arrived. London's social season resumed. Ballrooms filled once more with music and gossip. The Duke and Duchess attended a grand dinner hosted by the Countess of Fairmont, a woman whose reputation for elegance was matched only by her appetite for scandal. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Silverware gleamed. Conversation drifted pleasantly through courses of fine cuisine. Then the Countess struck. "Oh, Your Grace," she said sweetly, directing her attention toward Eleanor. "I recently heard the most fascinating story regarding your courtship." Several guests shifted uneasily. The trap was visible before it sprung. Eleanor met the woman's gaze calmly. "Indeed." The Countess smiled behind her wineglass. "They say the Duke selected you because your appearance presented no danger of vanity. Surely such tales cannot be true." Silence descended across the table. Forks paused. Eyes widened. Everyone knew the rumor. Everyone understood its cruelty. Several ladies appeared genuinely horrified. Others seemed eager for spectacle. Sebastian's jaw tightened. The humiliation he had once spoken carelessly now sat exposed before an audience. He prepared to intervene. Eleanor spoke first. Her voice remained steady. "A woman's worth cannot be measured by the face she was given." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She continued softly. "Beauty fades. Character reveals itself. I have learned that society frequently confuses the two." The words settled over the gathering like a sudden snowfall. The Countess's smile faltered. Embarrassment colored her cheeks. For the first time that evening she looked small. Not Eleanor. Never Eleanor. Conversation resumed eventually, but something fundamental had shifted. The Duchess emerged from the encounter with greater admiration than before. The Countess became the subject of whispered criticism. As guests departed hours later, Sebastian noticed several influential women approaching Eleanor with newfound respect. Something unfamiliar stirred within him. Pride. Not possessive pride. Something deeper. He admired her. The realization arrived quietly yet refused to leave. That night the carriage journey home unfolded beneath moonlit skies. Neither spoke much. Eleanor appeared thoughtful. Sebastian found himself replaying every moment of the evening. When they reached the manor, she excused herself and disappeared into the house. An hour later, unable to sleep, Sebastian wandered through dim corridors illuminated by scattered candlelight. A faint glow flickered beneath the chapel door. Curious, he approached. The small family chapel stood empty except for one figure kneeling near the altar. Eleanor. For several moments he simply watched. Her shoulders trembled. A hand pressed against her mouth as though attempting to silence pain. Then he saw tears glistening upon her face. Not graceful tears. Not delicate tears. The broken, exhausted tears of someone who had endured too much for too long. The sight struck him harder than any accusation could have. Because at that moment he finally understood the terrible truth. The world had spent years telling Eleanor she was not beautiful. He had merely become the voice she trusted enough to believe. The image refused to leave Sebastian's mind. Days passed after he discovered Eleanor weeping alone in the chapel, yet the memory followed him through every room of Blackthorne Manor. He saw it while reviewing estate accounts. He heard it in the silence between conversations. The sight of her carefully hidden grief lingered with relentless persistence because it had exposed something he could no longer deny. He had wounded a woman who had never once sought to wound him in return. Autumn surrendered to winter with unusual ferocity. Snow gathered along stone walls. Frost embroidered windows each morning. Bitter winds swept across the moors and rattled ancient branches outside the manor. Travel became difficult. Social engagements vanished beneath storms. For the first time since their marriage, the Duke and Duchess found themselves isolated together for weeks. The great house seemed transformed by the weather. Fires burned continuously within towering hearths. Candlelight softened shadowed corridors. The outside world disappeared beneath curtains of snow, leaving only warmth, silence, and long evenings stretching before them. At first little changed. Eleanor remained courteous. Sebastian remained restrained. Yet isolation has a peculiar habit of revealing truths that distraction conceals. One evening they occupied opposite sides of the library while snow battered the windows. Eleanor sat beside the fire reading. Sebastian attempted to focus upon correspondence. Neither spoke for nearly an hour. Then Eleanor glanced toward him. "You dislike winter." The observation surprised him. "What makes you believe that?" You become restless whenever storms prevent travel. A faint smile touched his mouth. And you enjoy observing people. I enjoy understanding them. The answer settled comfortably between them. For reasons neither fully understood, conversation followed. Small subjects became larger ones. Books led to memories. Memories led to confidences. Night after night the pattern repeated. They shared tea beside crackling fires. They discussed villages, politics, literature, and childhood experiences. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes they laughed. The distance between them did not vanish, but it began to narrow. One particularly cold evening, a storm extinguished several lamps throughout the manor. The library remained illuminated only by firelight dancing across shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. Outside, wind howled through darkness. Inside, a rare stillness settled around them. Eleanor stared thoughtfully into the flames. My sisters were beautiful. The sudden statement drew Sebastian's attention immediately. She continued before he could respond. People noticed them wherever they went. Something vulnerable entered her voice. As children, strangers would stop to compliment them. Relatives praised them. Suitors admired them. They deserved every kindness they received. The fire crackled softly. And you? He asked. A sad smile appeared. I was the sensible sister. The words carried years of quiet hurt. She described family gatherings where comparisons arrived disguised as compliments. She recalled hearing relatives reassure her parents that intelligence could compensate for appearance. She remembered learning to stand slightly behind her sisters during introductions because people preferred looking at them. Sebastian listened without interruption. Each memory deepened his understanding of wounds he had barely considered before. I eventually convinced myself it no longer mattered, she said. That beauty was a foolish concern. But it mattered. Yes. The honesty between them felt unusually fragile. She lowered her gaze. It matters less when strangers disappoint you. The implication hung unmistakably between them. Sebastian felt shame tighten within his chest. For several moments neither spoke. Then he set aside pride and asked quietly, "Do you regret marrying me?" The question startled her. She looked genuinely surprised. No. He searched her expression. Not even after what I said? Pain flickered briefly across her features. You wish for honesty, Your Grace? I do. Eleanor folded her hands carefully. I regret believing that marriage might be different. The answer struck harder than anger could have. Because anger implied expectation. Disappointment revealed loss. For the first time in many years, Sebastian found himself speaking about matters he normally guarded with ruthless determination. He spoke of his father. A powerful man whose trust had repeatedly been betrayed. He spoke of watching affection manipulated for advantage. He spoke of witnessing beauty treated as a weapon within aristocratic circles. I convinced myself admiration was dangerous, he admitted. Eleanor listened silently. I believed choosing a wife without those complications was practical. The firelight illuminated the regret in his face. And now, she asked. The question lingered. Sebastian stared into the flames. Now I think practicality may be overrated. A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound warmed something inside him. Winter continued. Their conversations deepened. Mutual understanding replaced some portion of distance. Yet Eleanor remained cautious. Trust damaged slowly rarely heals quickly. Sebastian sensed the invisible barrier still standing between them. Determined to bridge it, he conceived an unusual idea. Several weeks later, an artist arrived quietly at Blackthorne Manor. Eleanor discovered the arrangement only after it had begun. You commissioned a portrait? She asked. Sebastian nodded. If you permit it. Portraits among the aristocracy were common. Most softened imperfections. Many transformed subjects into idealized versions of themselves. Eleanor expected the same. The sessions lasted several days. The artist worked carefully. Sebastian visited often. Occasionally Eleanor caught him studying the painting with unusual concentration. His attention puzzled her. When the portrait was finally completed, servants carried it into the manor's drawing room. Evening sunlight streamed through tall windows. Eleanor approached slowly, then stopped. The woman staring back from the canvas was unmistakably herself. No alterations. No embellishments. No attempts to reshape her features into fashionable beauty. Every characteristic remained honest. Yet somehow the portrait radiated dignity, intelligence, warmth, and quiet strength. The artist had captured what mirrors never seemed to reveal. Emotion tightened her throat. She turned toward Sebastian. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because I wish the artist to paint the most beautiful woman I know. Silence filled the room. The words were sincere. She could see sincerity clearly. That certainty frightened her more than doubt. Part of her wanted desperately to believe him. Another part remembered every wound, every humiliation, every careless sentence that had changed her life. Tears gathered unexpectedly in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she could manage. That night she stood alone in her sitting room long after darkness settled beyond the windows. The portrait remained illuminated by a single lamp. She studied it repeatedly, searching for proof that his words were genuine. A servant interrupted shortly before midnight. "A letter has arrived for your grace." Eleanor accepted the envelope absently. Then she noticed the handwriting. Recognition drained the color from her face. The letter trembled slightly in her hands. She broke the seal. As her eyes moved across the page, shock gave way to something deeper. Something urgent. Something that altered everything. By dawn, the Duchess of Blackthorne was gone. Morning arrived gray and silent over Blackthorne Manor. Snow still covered the grounds, turning gardens and pathways into a landscape of pale silver. Servants moved through the house with unusual caution, sensing that something had shifted before anyone understood precisely what had happened. Sebastian discovered the truth shortly after sunrise. Eleanor's chambers were empty. The fire had gone cold. Her wardrobe remained mostly untouched. Only a few practical dresses were missing. No maid could explain her departure. No carriage had been formally requested. No destination had been announced. Upon her writing desk rested a single folded letter. Sebastian recognized her handwriting immediately. A strange unease tightened his chest as he opened it. The message was brief, painfully brief. "Your Grace, thank you for every kindness you have shown me in recent months. I believe they were sincere. However, sincerity cannot erase wounds that have become part of a person's soul. I pray that someday you discover what love truly means. May God keep you well. Eleanor." He read the note twice, then a third time. Each reading struck harder than the last. There was no accusation, no anger, no demand, only farewell. For the first time since inheriting his title, Sebastian Blackthorne felt completely powerless. He searched every corner of the manor for clues. He questioned servants. He contacted neighboring estates. By afternoon, fragments of information began emerging. A stable boy remembered seeing Eleanor leave before dawn. A coachman recalled delivering her to a railway station several towns away. An elderly maid revealed the existence of a distant aunt living in the northern mountains, a woman Eleanor had visited years ago after her mother's death. That single detail became his only lead. Days passed. Then another week. No further letters arrived. No messages appeared. The silence became unbearable. The manor itself seemed altered by her absence. The breakfast room felt larger. The library felt colder. The gardens she had restored appeared abandoned despite the efforts of gardeners. Everywhere Sebastian looked, he saw evidence of her presence. Books she had recommended. Village reports she had organized. Children's drawings sent from the school she funded. The realization came gradually. Then all at once. He loved her. Not the idea of her. Not the comfort of her companionship. Her. The woman who spoke gently to servants. The woman who endured cruelty without becoming cruel herself. The woman who had transformed his estate and, without his permission, transformed him as well. The truth arrived with merciless clarity. He had fallen in love with Eleanor Ashcombe long after convincing her she was impossible to love. The knowledge left him feeling sick. One evening he entered the drawing room where her portrait hung above the fireplace. Firelight illuminated the painted features he had once described as plain. Now he saw intelligence, compassion, strength. Beauty so profound it had nothing to do with symmetry or fashion. He stared at the portrait for a long time, then made a decision. The following morning, London awoke to astonishing news. Duke Sebastian Blackthorne had cancelled every social engagement. He postponed political meetings. He abandoned business affairs. He left the capital entirely. The most influential duke in England was searching for his wife. The revelation spread through society with explosive speed. Ballrooms buzzed with speculation. Newspapers printed rumors. Noblewomen exchanged theories over tea. Some believed Eleanor had discovered another suitor. Others imagined scandal. Nobody guessed the truth. The Duke was chasing the woman he had once wounded beyond measure. Winter tightened its grip as Sebastian traveled north. The journey proved difficult. Roads disappeared beneath snow. Mountain winds battered carriages. Several times he was forced to continue on horseback. At every village he asked questions. At every inn he showed Eleanor's description. Gradually a trail emerged. A station master remembered her. A shopkeeper recalled selling supplies to a polite young lady traveling alone. A shepherd had seen her crossing a valley road. Each clue carried him farther from London, farther from the life he had always known. The pursuit became more than a search. It became a reckoning. Hours spent alone in the saddle forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. He remembered the careless conversation outside the library. He remembered every moment he had hidden behind practicality. He remembered how easily he had mistaken emotional distance for wisdom. The mountains seemed to strip away his defenses with every mile. By the second week, exhaustion shadowed his features. By the third, pride had vanished entirely. Only determination remained. One stormy evening he arrived at a remote village nestled among towering peaks. Snow swirled through narrow streets. Lanterns glowed warmly behind frosted windows. The village innkeeper listened carefully to Eleanor's description. Recognition flashed across the man's face. "Yes," he said slowly. "A lady matching that description arrived some time ago." Hope surged through Sebastian. "Where is she?" The innkeeper pointed toward the mountains beyond the village. "She stays with an elderly woman in a cottage near the eastern ridge." Relief nearly overwhelmed him. After weeks of uncertainty he was finally close. Yet as he thanked the innkeeper and prepared to leave, another question surfaced. What if she refused to see him? The possibility struck harder than freezing wind. For the first time he understood what Eleanor had endured throughout their marriage. The terrifying uncertainty of caring more deeply than the other person. That night he slept little. Before dawn he began climbing toward the ridge. The trail wound through forests heavy with snow. Sunrise slowly painted the horizon with shades of gold and rose. The world seemed suspended between darkness and light. At last he reached the summit. A vast mountain landscape unfolded before him. Valleys stretched endlessly below. Mist drifted through distant peaks. And there, standing near the edge of the ridge, wrapped in a dark winter cloak, was Eleanor. The rising sun illuminated her profile. For a moment she remained unaware of his presence. She looked peaceful, free, beautiful beyond anything he had ever known. Sebastian stopped several yards away. His heart pounded with frightening force. Weeks of searching had brought him to this exact moment. Then Eleanor turned. Their eyes met across the mountain silence. And suddenly neither of them could look away. For several heartbeats neither of them moved. The mountain wind drifted between them, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Golden sunlight spilled across the ridge, illuminating the world in soft brilliance. Far below, valleys rested beneath a veil of morning mist. It was the kind of landscape poets spent entire lifetimes attempting to describe, yet neither Eleanor nor Sebastian noticed its beauty fully. They saw only each other. Shock flickered across Eleanor's face. Not because she had imagined she would never see him again. Because she had never imagined he would come this far. Sebastian looked exhausted. His coat bore evidence of difficult travel. Snow clung to his boots. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The proud Duke who had once seemed untouchable now appeared entirely human. Eleanor. Her name emerged almost as a prayer. She swallowed carefully. Your Grace. The formal title struck him harder than any insult. Weeks earlier she had spoken his name comfortably. Now distance had returned to every syllable. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence held memories, regrets, and questions neither knew how to begin answering. Finally Eleanor broke eye contact. You should not have come. I had no choice. A faint crease appeared between her brows. There is always a choice. Not when the alternative is losing the person you love. The words escaped before caution could restrain them. Eleanor froze. The mountain seemed to fall silent. Even the wind appeared to pause. Sebastian took a slow step forward. I love you. No grand speech accompanied the confession. No audience witnessed it. No orchestra played. Only truth remained. 4 months he had hidden behind logic, caution, and pride. Now every defense stood shattered. Emotion flickered across Eleanor's face before she concealed it. You did not love me when you married me. No. The honesty surprised her. Sebastian continued. I admired your character. I respected your kindness. But love? He shook his head. I was too foolish to understand what it was. Pain entered her expression. And yet you expected me to remain while you learned? The question carried no anger. Only sadness. That sadness hurt infinitely more. I expected nothing, he answered quietly. I came because I needed you to hear the truth. She folded her arms against the cold. The truth arrived rather late. I know. You humiliated me. I know. You made me believe every cruel thing society had ever said. His jaw tightened. I know. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Tears brightened her eyes. You spoke the one fear I spent my entire life trying to overcome. The vulnerability in her voice cut through him. All the miles he had traveled suddenly felt insignificant compared to the distance he had created with a single careless sentence. For years Eleanor had survived ridicule. She had survived exclusion. She had survived pity. But Sebastian had been different. Because she had trusted him. Because his opinion mattered. Because somewhere within her heart she had hoped he might see something nobody else ever had. I was never truly hurt by being called plain, she whispered. I was hurt because I thought perhaps you saw me clearly. The confession hung between them. I did see you clearly. A bitter laugh escaped her. Then why did you say those things? Sebastian stared toward the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a raw honesty she had never heard before. Because I was afraid. The answer surprised her. He turned back toward her. My father loved my mother completely. When she died, he became a shadow of himself. I watched powerful men destroyed by affection. I watched beauty become a weapon in marriages built upon ambition rather than devotion. The morning sunlight touched his face. I convinced myself that love was weakness. Eleanor listened silently. So I searched for safety instead. His gaze never left hers. And then I met you. Emotion tightened his throat. You were kind when kindness offered no advantage. You treated servants and dukes with equal respect. You spent your fortune helping strangers. You made every place you entered better simply by being there. A tear escaped despite Eleanor's efforts. Sebastian continued. I thought I had chosen a practical wife. His voice softened. What I actually found was the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. The words settled over her like sunlight after winter. Yet wounds do not disappear simply because they are acknowledged. Trust requires more than beautiful sentences. She knew that. So did he. Slowly Sebastian reached into his coat. Eleanor immediately recognized the emerald necklace. The same necklace he had given her on their wedding night. The symbol of a marriage born from misunderstanding. He looked down at the jewels for several seconds. Then did something unexpected. He placed the necklace upon a nearby stone. Not in her hands. Not around her neck. Away from both of them. Eleanor stared in confusion. I brought this because I thought it mattered. His expression softened. During the journey I realized it does not. The emerald sparkled beneath morning light. It cannot purchase forgiveness. He stepped back. It cannot repair trust. The mountain wind stirred around them. It cannot make you stay. For the first time since arriving, Sebastian dropped completely to one knee. Not ceremonially. Not theatrically. Simply humbly. A duke kneeling before a woman the world once called plain. A man kneeling before the person he loved. Eleanor's breath caught. I do not ask for immediate forgiveness. His voice trembled slightly. I do not ask you to forget what happened. The honesty made every word more powerful. I ask only for the opportunity to spend the rest of my life proving that I was wrong. Tears now flowed freely down Eleanor's cheeks. Not because she had never dreamed of hearing such words. Because she had. Many times. And eventually stopped believing they could ever become real. The little girl who had hidden behind beautiful sisters. The young woman overlooked at ballrooms. The bride humiliated by whispers. All those versions of herself seemed present upon that mountain. Watching. Waiting. Hoping. Fear remained. Pain remained. Yet something else remained too. Love. Because despite everything, she loved him. Not the duke. Not the title. The flawed, stubborn, complicated man kneeling before her. The man who had crossed England to find her. The man who had finally learned humility. Slowly Eleanor stepped forward. Sebastian's heart pounded. She stopped directly before him. For one agonizing moment he could not read her expression. Then she offered her hand. His breath caught. I cannot promise perfection. Her voice trembled. I cannot promise I will never remember the hurt. A fragile smile touched her lips. But I can promise I no longer wish to face life without you. Relief flooded through him with overwhelming force. Sebastian rose and carefully took her hand. The first touch felt almost sacred. No ballroom applause greeted them. No crowd celebrated. Yet neither had ever experienced a more important victory. Months later, when they returned to London together, society scarcely recognized the transformation. The Duke no longer walked several paces ahead of his wife. He walked beside her. He listened when she spoke. He sought her opinion openly. And whenever someone praised her beauty, he smiled because he knew they still misunderstood. Her greatest beauty had never been visible in a mirror. Years passed. The schools expanded. The villages prospered. The marriage deepened. The wounds of the past gradually became scars rather than open injuries. One evening, long after the gossip had faded into memory, Sebastian and Eleanor stood together in the manor gardens watching the sunset. "Do you know something curious?" Eleanor asked. "What is that?" She smiled softly. "You spent months searching for beauty in the wrong places." He laughed. "That is true. And where did you finally find it?" Sebastian drew her closer. "Standing beside me." As twilight settled across the estate, their silhouettes remained together beneath blooming roses, no longer defined by society's judgment, but by the love they had chosen. And thus the story remembered by generations was not that a powerful duke married a woman others considered plain. It was that a woman who had been taught she was unworthy of love changed the heart of a man powerful enough to possess anything except the one thing he needed most, until he earned it.